Hey, baby, I hear those blues a calling. It's time for the Frazier on Frasier podcast. Welcome, everyone. My name is Adam Frazier. I am your host. And with me, of course, is my good friend Wes Corwin.
How you doing? How you guys doing?
So, Wes, we are filming our very first episode again.
For the second time.
That was first time it didn't record so good, so we're gonna do it again.
Best time for the second time.
So let us introduce ourselves. Go ahead and why don't you start us off?
Sure. I am Wes Corwin. I am a stand-up comedian. I won Funniest Comedian in Texas 2018. And more importantly to this is when we started this podcast, I had never seen an episode of Frasier, and I have known Adam Frazier for quite a few, I think 4 or 5 years. We were both members of a Rocky Horror Shadowcast, and he has been pitching me on a podcast where he talks about Frasier, and this is the most I can possibly do is help make this happen, and I'm very excited. I've recorded a number of podcasts, and this is the one I'm most excited about.
You've also written for Cracked.
I wrote for Cracked and Funny or Die. I have a number of, but none of those things matter more than this podcast. This is my new credit. This is it.
You're a very funny guy.
Very
funny guy. Very happy to have you on the podcast with me. And yes, I am Adam Frazier.
Right.
The Frazier and Frasier on Frasier.
Mm-hmm.
And my sole qualification for doing this is that I've seen every single episode of Frasier multiple times.
Every single episode of Frasier, all 9 seasons.
So, 11 seasons.
All 11 seasons. All 9 and then 2 more. That's how many seasons. Great.
So let's talk a little bit about Frasier for those who have never seen it or are unfamiliar with it.
Yes.
Frasier is a spinoff, the second spinoff of the very popular television show Cheers, which also had 11 seasons, I believe.
11 seasons.
And Frasier Crane was a character that was introduced in season 3. He quickly became sort of a favorite of the show. Mm-hmm. And when it came time for Cheers to end, they decided to give him his own spinoff.
Yes.
So this is, Frasier's show. This is him starting a new life in Seattle, his hometown, reforging relationships with his family members and making new friends, mm-hmm. and also hosting his own radio show,
right?
Where he dishes out, psychiatric advice. He's a psychiatrist. I probably should have mentioned that.
He's divorced his wife. He's abandoned his son. There will be blood style. I've abandoned my boy to host a radio program in Seattle, a city that will never get tired of, and an industry, radio, that will never die. So it's a real secure bet going into the future.
So I think of it as one of the quintessential 90s sitcoms.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's a brilliant show. One of the most successful spinoffs of all time.
Yes.
And we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna go episode by episode,
all the way through.
All the way through, discussing each episode, and just giving our thoughts on it and making each other laugh, and that'll be enough for a podcast, right?
Making each other laugh and hopefully making you laugh at home.
Exactly. We're kind of in a situation right now, the whole world, where we're all stuck at home, and I feel like a lot of people are binging television shows right now. Frasier, I think, is a perfect show to binge watch, mm-hmm. But it's not always satisfying just binge watch by yourself. Sometimes it helps to hear other people's thoughts on the show and watch it with them. So that's kind of this is meant to supplement your Frasier watching experience.
Like if you could go into work and you were watching Frasier, you would want to be at the water cooler and be like, "Hey, so I'm watching Frasier," and your friends would be like, "No way, we're watching everyone's watching Frasier right now, right?" But you don't have a water cooler. All you have is Frasier. Let us be your water cooler. Let us.
Exactly.
We're going to share our feelings about Frasier. And once the episode is done, you can talk into the ended MP3 file your thoughts, and you can pretend we were like, oh, that also is good.
We'll record ourselves just saying like, just lines like, oh yeah, you're right, and
hey,
and
great point, yeah. And
then you can pretend like you have people
yeah,
talking to you.
Why isn't Norm on the show yet? Yeah, absolutely.
So let's get into it. Our very first episode, The Good Son.
The Good Son.
So we open in the recording booth, KACL, yes. The radio studio where Frasier is now working. He is dishing out psychiatric advice to his listeners, and he gets a call from Russell. Who is sort of struggling to find himself. He's kind of depressed. He's same dead end job,
right. Same
old apartment, that sort of thing.
And Roz gives him like the, hey, you got to wrap up. You've got which is sort of and he decides to apply Russell's diatribe to his own situation, and it sets up
Russell, by the way, voiced by the great Griffin Dunne. Griffin Dunne from such films as American Werewolf in London and After Hours. Mm-hmm. And this will not be the last time we hear from Griffin Dunne on this show.
No, of course not. Well,
no.
But is he? And I think he's not playing Russell later. This isn't a situation where he influences Russell's life and Russell becomes part of Frasier's life.
No, totally different character.
All right. Russell, does Russell ever pop up again in the Frasier-verse? Is there an episode? Is there an after credit
scene? There's maybe a guy named Russell. I don't think.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, he basically, Frasier kind of hijacks the conversation.
Of course.
And starts talking about his own life, right, and sort of how it applies to Russell's situation. He 6 months ago was living in Boston, mm-hmm, going to the same bar night after night. Okay. Which of course is a reference to the previous sitcom Frasier appeared on, Wings.
I would be Yep. That's what he's referencing. That's it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And of course he basically bears his soul out to Seattle. He's talking about how he's moving back home and he's trying to make the most of it. And if Russell is feeling this way, that he's depressed and that his life isn't going anywhere, that he needs to make a change, just like Frasier did.
Mm-hmm. Get out of there. Change something. If it doesn't work, change something else. Right.
That's a great line.
That's a good line.
And of course, when Russell doesn't respond, Roz points out that they've actually cut to the news.
30 seconds ago, almost immediately into Frasier's monologue, at which point Frasier complains that he bears his soul, and everybody's listening to Chopper Dave's Rush Hour Roundup, which I've been told will come up later.
Chopper Dave does come up, I believe, in a future episode.
I assume he's like a villain / romantic rival. He's never not in a helicopter, I assume.
He's always in a helicopter, even when he's walking through the studio. He's in his helicopter.
He's in a helicopter, I assume. Otherwise, how is he Chopper Dave? That's my question.
Yeah. So, of course, Frasier, he starts talking to Roz. They've just ended the show. He tries to get some feedback on, the show that they've just done. Roz, avoiding the subject, tells him that Frasier got a call from his brother. Mm-hmm. And of course, when Frasier calls her out on, kind of avoiding the subject,
trying to change the subject so she doesn't have to address it, he's like, "Come on, I want my criticism. I'm not a piece of Lalique," which is not a thing. I know what that is.
She goes off and talks about all the mistakes that he made during the show. Mm-hmm. There was 28 seconds of dead air, scrambled the station's call letters, and kept referring to Jerry with the identity crisis as Jeff.
Then he thinks about it for a second, and he decides, you say my brother called. And he takes the notepaper and he leaves.
And that brings us to our next scene. So in our next scene, we're in Cafe Nervosa, a very much one of the most seen locations in this entire show.
A staple, a regular hang.
It's supposed to be like it's sort of your typical Seattle coffee shop.
It's the bar from Friends, which I don't know. The coffee shop from Friends, the bar.
Central Perk, I believe, is what it's called.
I'm pretty sure it's called the coffee shop from Friends.
Right.
I'm like,
it should be.
Pretty sure.
So Frasier is there in Cafe Nervosa. He's meeting with his brother Niles, who we're meeting for the first time. Niles is, of course, talking about his day, and Frasier isn't really paying attention at all to what he's saying.
No.
They exchange sort of a witty, tete-a-tete sort of, jabs at one another.
Yes.
Niles doesn't think much of pop psychiatry, as he puts it. He looks down at Frasier for what he's doing, being a psychiatrist on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Niles is also a psychiatrist. He's just in private practice.
He's one of them big city psychiatrists to the stars, and meanwhile Frasier is the people's psychiatrist, trying to help these regular Joes, regular schmoes out in the street with a ham radio, possibly.
So we sort of get our first taste of Niles, and we see the differences and also a lot of the similarities between the two characters.
A lot of the
Niles, of course, is played brilliantly by David Hyde Pierce.
David Hyde Pierce. And you shared with me when we were first watching the episode that David Hyde Pierce was originally confused when he received the script because he thought they'd written the same character twice.
Exactly, but there are very subtle differences between Frasier and Niles. One thing, Niles is a bit of a germaphobe, as we see in this episode. He wipes down his chair before sitting in it. He is also, I think, just generally a bit more high-strung than Frasier. Frasier can kind of loosen up every now and then. I think Niles is very, very set in his ways.
Absolutely.
And,
absolutely.
Yeah. So they have a discussion. The subject of their father comes up. Their father, Martin, who is a retired ex-policeman. He is living on his own, and it's not really going well because he is sort of still recovering from an injury he sustained from a robbery that he attempted to foil, and he took a bullet in the hip. And
now his friends came to visit him. They found him fallen in the shower. He cannot move around. He's not as mobile. Doesn't have the mobility.
Right. So it's not a good situation for Martin, and it's to the point where Niles is, thinking that they need to do something about his living situation because he can't really live alone by himself anymore. He's a frail old man with a severe hip injury. He needs supervision. So they briefly discuss, I think, putting him in a home.
Niles reaches into his briefcase, unclicks it, pulls out a brochure for Golden Acres. But he is as disgusted by the idea as Frasier is. He's prepared the necessary materials to go through with it, but he also has a sardonic slogan that for Golden Acres, we care so you don't have to. And Frasier takes him at his word and says, it says that, and then Niles says, well, it might as well. Now, this is the first time I've realized just how few of, even over Frasier's head, Niles' jokes usually fly. They don't always hit their mark.
Yeah, I think Niles is definitely, maybe the more witty one.
Yes, yes, perhaps.
So they discuss, so they move from, discussing putting him in a home to having Martin live with one of them. And Niall points out that, of course, Martin can't live with him because of his wife, Maris.
Maris the heiress.
Maris the heiress, who is kind of, she's a rich... I think that's where all of Niles' money comes from is Maris. So Maris is even more high strung than Niles. Very, very she's a character, Maris.
She is a character. There's no denying that. She is a character.
Frasier describes her as like the sun, but without the warmth.
You have to like her from a distance, is what.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Maris and Martin don't get along, so that's probably not going to be a good situation. So that just leaves Frasier. And Frasier reluctantly agrees to take in his dad. So that moves us along to the scene where we introduce Martin, played by John Mahoney. We see Frasier in his apartment, very well decorated, very big apartment in Seattle. He's got African art. He's got all these really fine pieces of furniture. He's got a big piano. He's playing
African art, and he's got a piano. He's really decked out this place. It's very eclectic.
We'll get into that.
All right, fine.
And he hears a knock. He walks to the door, takes sort of one last look at his apartment, sort of this last moment before his life is completely about to change, opens the door, and there is Niles and Martin, and he welcomes them into the house, but Martin isn't really having it. He's
No.
he's a bit of a curmudgeon.
He is in fact.
He is in very much the opposite of Frasier and Niles. He isn't he doesn't have fancy tastes. He's not as cultured, I guess you would say.
Right.
And he is very, he isn't exactly thrilled with the idea of living with Frasier either. But Frasier is trying to, make the best of it. He's gotten Martin his favorite beer, Valentine's.
Got a hot links and coleslaw, and he rented a Charles Bronson movie.
Which they don't specify which Charles Bronson movie, so I have to assume that it's Death Wish 3.
It has to be. What else would he have gotten to make his dad feel welcome?
I mean, I can't think of a better movie to watch with coleslaw and hot links than Death Wish 3.
Hot links. How many Death Wish movies did they make? Let's not get off track. We're already getting off track.
Yes. So, of course, Martin isn't really, buying into the whole, this is all going to be, nice and fun for the both of us. He is pretty upset about the fact that he can't really live on it by himself anymore, as a lot of people his age tend to be. I guess they're losing. He's lost a bit of his freedom, his independence, and moving back in with his son. And yes, they discuss Frasier and Martin. They have a brief discussion. They're trying to connect. Frasier's trying to connect with him, talking about the different pieces of furniture he has in his apartment. He's got he's got the Ames chair. He's got the Kobisher lamp, and he's got a couch that is an exact replica of the one Coco Chanel had in her apartment. And Martin, of course, points out that nothing matches. Frasier was like, well, that's the idea. It's called eclectic. And the theory is if it's a really fine piece of furniture, it doesn't matter if they match, they'll go together. So we hear another knock on the door, and a man brings in the chair, Martin's chair. Which we will, again, is sort of a staple of this show. It's a very ugly chair, green. It's got duct tape all over it. And they just kind of set it down in the middle of Frasier's nice, clean apartment, and Frasier's like, well, I don't think this is going to go anywhere. It doesn't really go with anything else in the apartment.
And he goes, I know, it's eclectic. And that's got him, idiot. Got you. Martin doesn't call Frasier an idiot yet. That happens later and in every subsequent episode, but we'll get there. We'll get there.
So, sensing that, this is going to be a much larger argument, Niles, leaves, and he mentions on his way out, "Oh, Dad, have you mentioned Eddie?"
Mm-hmm. And it's revealed that Frasier is horrified by the idea of Eddie being there, and Martin's like, he's my best friend. And Frasier reveals that he's weird. He gives me the creeps. All he does is stare at him, and you're like, who's Eddie? And then it cuts to the Eddie title card, and it is revealed as Martin enjoys watching TV, and Frasier is made uncomfortable by someone slightly off screen.
They're watching Death Wish 3.
They're watching Death Wish 3, the best Death Wish. And it's revealed that Eddie is a dog, and he's sitting there just staring at Frasier.
Played by Moose, the dog.
Yeah, played by Moose, and sometimes by his son, who is also named. Was it also named Moose? Yes.
He had a son. I don't think they ever had him as on Frasier. I know he filled in on a couple other things that Moose did, but
yes.
Moose is probably, I think there was some piece of trivia I read a while back saying that I think out of all the people who worked on the show, Moose received the most fan mail.
Yes, he was. I see him now. I have a picture of him as on the cover of Entertainment Weekly.
He's adorable.
He's great.
He's an adorable little, what is he? He's a Jack Russell Terrier.
He's a Jack Russell Terrier. Sorry, the thing I was confused by is he and his son were both in My Dog Skip, is what I was thinking.
Oh, right.
Yes.
The classic Frankie Muniz film.
In my opinion, the best Luke Wilson film.
Yes. So that's Eddie.
Yep.
Him and Frasier don't get along, or rather, Frasier doesn't like Eddie. Eddie, we don't know how he really feels. He just seems to enjoy kind of annoying Frasier.
Yep.
So we cut to, I believe, the next day.
Yes. At Cafe Nervosa, Frasier isn't doing. He's a little frazzled.
Yeah, it's been a long, day?
It's been 24 hours thereabout. And
so, yeah. So him and Niles are meeting, and they're discussing, the change, the big change in Frasier's life. That he's living with their dad.
Yeah.
And Niles brings up the idea of hiring a home health care worker.
Right.
Someone to, cook, clean, and help Martin with his physical therapy.
Right.
And I think it's said that him and Maris are helping pay for this. I don't think Frasier's doing it necessarily all out of his own pocket. So he says that he'll get him in touch with an agency, and they'll arrange for some people to come over and they'll meet.
That's interviews, and they say not Frasier wants to hug Niles for his help, and then Niles says a handshake is as good as a hug, as their mom always said, and then they shake hands.
That's gives you a bit of an idea of the kind of woman their mom was.
Right.
So we then cut to Frasier and Martin in the apartment. Frasier has just, interviewed a woman who is applying for the position of the healthcare worker. He closes the door and it turns to Martin and says, "Well, what was wrong with that one?"
Right.
Martin thinks she was planning on stealing. She was planning on stealing all of Frasier's precious
She
furniture and
agreed to a job at the agency and to come into an interview as part of a larger heist to sort of heist Frasier's various African erotica.
Exactly. So we get another knock at the door, and it's a woman, Daphne.
Yeah. Daphne
Moon. Played by Jane Leavies.
Yes.
Don't
ask like I would. Don't ask like I would know. Just try. Whatever you say, I'm not going to argue against. You got it. Trust me.
Daphne Moon, yes. Played by Jane Leavies.
Yes.
She's standing there in the door. She's got her hand down her shirt.
Yes.
She's adjusting her bra or something.
Caught me with my hand in the biscuit tin.
Caught me with my hand in the biscuit tin.
Which, yes, is I assume that goes on T-shirts and posters, and that's her like.
That's her catchphrase.
That's her,
actually in the show.
That's her. Did I do that? Like frequently, Frasier will like be in the middle of something, and like all of a sudden he'll slip on a banana peel, and then he'll yell like Daphne, and then it'll cut to her, and she'll make a sassy face at the camera. Oh, caught me with my hand in the biscuit tin. I assume I assume most of the branding is around biscuit tin.
Daphne, we're introduced to Daphne. She's applying for the position of home health care worker.
Right.
And she immediately, I think, kind of connects with Martin. She goes in, she immediately compliments Martin's chair, of course we know.
Asks about Eddie, which is the first time someone's been nice to Eddie in the show. She loves the chair over all the other furniture, and she's also a psychic. She can identify that Martin is a policeman. I don't know if Martin likes the fact that she got that read on him or that she has these mystical abilities, but Martin is intrigued in this way.
Yes. She also tries to read Frasier the same way and guesses that he's a florist.
Yes.
Which is wrong.
Incorrect.
So it comes and goes, obviously. She's not psychic all the time. Yeah. But she is a bit psychic.
She's just a bit psychic. It's strongest during her time of the month, as she feels very comfortable letting the group know.
Yeah, she. I mean, much like Martin, she doesn't really have a filter.
No.
She kind of says whatever's on her mind, and I think that's another reason why her and Martin kind of connect.
Absolutely.
And she gets out her purse. She's got all this stuff in her purse. She's got like a sponge, and like a wine glass, and like a heart-shaped box. Just all this,
which is a Nirvana reference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she brings out her resume and hands it to Frasier. So, I think they exchange pleasantries. Frasier, again, isn't very keen on Daphne, but Martin interjects, says, well, you got the job. Mm-hmm. And Frasier, that doesn't sit well with Frasier.
No.
So Daphne leaves them alone. She goes into the bathroom to let Martin and Frasier duke it out. Mm-hmm. And Frasier doesn't like her because she's weird.
She's an oddball and a psychic, and Frasier fears what he doesn't understand. It's one of those things. She's come to understand it, much like the X-Men. Daphne knew when she inherited those powers there would be those that hate and fear her for her advanced ways. So she isn't really thrown by Frasier's bigotry.
Well, and Martin's, well, you want me to pick one? I picked her. Mm-hmm. And Frasier, again, just doesn't like it, but Martin points out that she's only going to be here when he's not.
Yeah.
So he relents and he says, Daphne, you got the job.
Right.
Which she...
Oh, go ahead.
She points out that she's going to move in with them, which isn't exactly what Frasier had in mind. Mm-hmm. This isn't a live-in position, but that's exactly what's going to happen. She's going to live in the apartment with Frasier, with Martin. She's going to be there all the time, giving out psychic predictions and helping Frasier's father. It's not a great time for Frasier.
No, it's not. He makes it clear that he's not a fan of it. Martin volunteers Frasier's study for Daphne to sleep in, and that is the last straw, and he starts yelling about how much he's adjusting. He had to make all these adjustments just to move to Seattle, and now he's got to take in his dad and take in this woman to take care of his dad. And he might, like, in trying to define these boundaries, he's a little insensitive, especially to Martin's desires, because Martin took a bullet in the hip, and he doesn't want this either. He was hoping to enjoy a wonderful retirement and take on activities, and now he's a man with a non-functioning hip.
Yes, and this is really the big emotional point of the episode, because Frasier, Martin's accusing Frasier essentially of accusing Martin of being a burden.
Yes.
And Frasier, he wants his dad to be there. He wanted to take in his dad.
Right.
He wanted to be the good son.
Mm-hmm.
And because he's his father, and how does Martin repay him? It's a snide comment about this. It's a little put down about that. And he storms out of the apartment.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sad end.
Yep.
Very emotional performance by Kelsey Grammer.
Mm-hmm.
We cut to KACL, the studio. Frasier's doing one of his shows. I think they're just finishing up on the show.
As a brief sprint from the bathroom area back into the studio where he explains.
That's right.
And they haven't pre-recorded him saying, "We'll be right back," which is very funny and also suggests maybe he hasn't been on the show very long, to the point that they haven't pre-recorded simple bits like "We'll be right back after these messages."
So Roz, asks Frasier, "Oh, what's eating you?" Mm-hmm. And Frasier kind of gives her the whole story about his father and Daphne, and all the changes in his life, and he was just kind of hoping that this was going to be a new life for himself. He was going to go out there, he was going to move to Seattle, it was going to be a clean slate. He didn't necessarily picture all of these people in his life, his father,
and his psychic sidekick in some ways.
He's got like a psychic kook,
right?
Living in his house now, taking care of his father. He's got a
dog,
neurotic brother.
Yes,
he's got a dog.
Well, the brother isn't in the house, but yes, he has all these things.
He comes over quite often.
Yeah.
So Roz asks him, "Well, have you ever heard the story of Lupe Velez?"
Lupe Velez.
And Roz tells us the story of Lupe Velez. She was apparently a movie star in the 30s whose career had taken a dive. Mm-hmm. And she wanted to, I guess, make one final stab at immortality. Mm-hmm. So she decides to kill herself.
Right.
She decides, she plans this lavish suicide. Mm-hmm. She's got flowers, candles, she's got all her makeup. And she takes the pills,
mm-hmm. Yes.
And they don't sit well with her.
The enchilada combo plate she chose as her last meal does not combine well with the suicide drugs.
So she stumbles to the bathroom, trips, goes headfirst into the toilet, dies, and that's how they found her. Mm-hmm. Frasier asks, "Why are you telling me this story?" And Roz says, "Well, even though things don't happen like we planned, they have a way of working out anyway."
And then Frasier is like, "How did that work out for Lupe Velez?"
And Roz points out, "All she ever wanted was to be remembered."
Uh-huh.
Will you ever forget that story?
And what a cute sort of wrap up. And we both did research on the story, and none of it happened.
Yeah, if this story sounds made up, it's because it most likely is.
It was an urban legend based on an actual person's suicide. A woman who killed herself, and it's a mysterious, weird Hollywood mystery because she was a Hollywood star. She was made possibly pregnant by a male actor, another star, and she overdosed on pills and decided to write a letter blaming him for the death of her and their child because he was denying them. And then when he was approached about it afterwards, he was like, "What? No, I agreed to do it. This doesn't make any sense." and it's weird, and maybe the mafia's involved, and there was another actor that was interested in her. It's a super weird, interesting 1930s Hollywood mystery, and somebody decided to boil it down to, in a book of urban legends, to, hey, what if she shot herself to death? And that, I don't think... And another thing, I should have started with this, her name is Lupe. It's not Loopy, and that's just how people in the 90s... This is the closest we get, I think, in the Cheers Frasier's verse to a non-white person, is this Lupe Velez story so far. We haven't run into... And at this point, I've seen 3 Frasier episodes. We haven't run into somebody who is even kind of non-white. I want to push that. There was
a girl in Cafe Nervosa, the waitress.
Thank you, Adam. Did she have a line?
I think so. I think she asked what they were wanting to order.
Great. You're right, Adam. What a diverse
show this is.
God, this show is more diverse than Friends, for the reason you've pointed out, but that's a terrible metric, Adam. That's a terrible barometer.
It is.
Yeah.
So, of course, Frasier thinks about this. This is kind of, that gives him something to think about, I guess. And they get a call. It's a call-in show. Mm-hmm. They get calls. So we get a call from Claire, who is voiced by none other than Linda Hamilton.
Linda Hamilton.
Mrs. Sarah Connor.
From Terminators 1 and 2. And
Dark Fate.
And Dark Fate, also.
Yeah. What, did you see Dark Fate?
I did see Dark Fate. Maggie loved Dark Fate.
Oh, I heard it wasn't great.
Here's the thing. We can't make our Frasier podcast about Dark Fate, but I think
yes, we can.
I think Dark Fate was underrated. I enjoyed Dark Fate.
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
All right, fine.
Since apparently we can't talk about anything other than Frasier.
They made 5 Death Wish movies. Let's talk about Frasier. I'm sorry. They made 5.
So Claire is. She's gone through a bad breakup. She broke up with her boyfriend about 8 months ago, and she just can't get over it.
Yes.
She feels like she's in mourning, and she just doesn't know what to do. So she's calling in Frasier's show, and Frasier tells her that it's okay. I mean, sometimes things don't necessarily work out the way we plan, but they have a way of working out anyway. Have you ever heard the story of Lupe Velez?
Lupe Velez, he says, carrying on the inaccurate pronunciation and the false story about a comedian woman in the 30s shitting herself to death. How appropriate. How fucking... And that's the pilot. That's Frasier episode 1.
That won an Emmy.
That was an Emmy-winning episode, mostly, and not only that,
due to the last part about Lupe Velez.
It had a cultural thing on the it had an effect on the zeitgeist. The Simpsons 2 years later wrote a Lupe Velez joke. It came up. It permeated through stories, then on from ever forward.
So yeah, that is the first episode of Frasier. Yes. Wes, what were your thoughts?
It's a good show. I enjoyed it. Here's the thing, because now as said, we had to re-record this episode. So I've seen 3 Frasier episodes. It's interesting to see the consistency of the show. You see a lot of the characters are very well fleshed out. There's a lot of pattern work. It's one of those things where you're first introduced to these people and you're like, who are they? And you realize there's a lot of beef, there's a lot of meat to the parts these people are playing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there are definitely some good comedic moments. As you pointed out, the scene where Frasier's running from the bathroom to the studio, that's pretty funny.
The comedic chemistry, any scene with Frasier and Niles in the same space tends to be dynamite. They work. It's weird because it's interesting that one of the actors, especially in the pilot, thought they were so similar. It's interesting to see them jibe off of each other. It's a high-paced, frenetic energy watching them trade barbs.
So we've got a lot of that to look forward to. This is only the first episode. We're going to keep doing more, and we hope you'll continue to listen along with us.
Yep.
Once again, my name is Adam Frazier. Wes Corwin.
Yep.
Thank you for being on.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Frazier and Frasier podcast, and good night.
Good night.